On a bright, bustling day at a local diner, golden sunlight fills the room as a young boy witnesses an unusual scene. An elderly couple is reprimanded by a strict manager for misplacing their wallet. Risking trouble, the boy quietly covers their bill, sparing them further distress. Later, retracing his steps, he finds the lost wallet and returns it, only to discover that the couple is in fact generous millionaires. Little does he know, his small act of kindness will soon intertwine their lives, setting off a chain of life-changing events. The air inside the mid-range restaurant was thick with the mingling scents of grilled steak, buttered vegetables, and freshly baked bread. Plates clattered against polished wooden tables, silverware scraped against porcelain, and the low murmur of conversation wove through the warm, dimly lit space. Ethan sat near the entrance, elbows propped on the table, stomach tight with hunger. The laminated menu sat in front of him, the words blurring together as his eyes darted to the plates that passed by in the hands of busy servers. His mouth watered at the sight of golden brown fried chicken, steam curling from mashed potatoes drenched in thick brown gravy. His fingers twitched. The money in his pocket was just enough for a meal, but he knew better. That money wasn't his to spend. It was for his mother. 14 years old and already carrying the weight of decisions most kids his age never had to make, Ethan swallowed hard and folded the menu shut. He exhaled, willing the gnawing hunger to quiet down. 1 more hour, maybe 2. He could wait. He was here to meet Lucas, his friend who worked in the back kitchen, finishing up his shift. Ethan's eyes flickered toward the cash register where a pale-skinned couple, well-dressed, rings flashing on their fingers, counted out bills with ease, laughing between themselves. He looked away. Then the shouting started. A voice, sharp and edged with impatience, cut through the hum of the restaurant like a knife. "If you don't have money, you don't eat here." Ethan's head snapped up. At the far end of the restaurant, a table had gone silent. A waitress hesitated nearby, her notepad clutched to her chest as if unsure whether to stay or go. In the center of it all stood Rick, the owner, a heavy-set man with a face lined from years of scowling, towering over 2 elderly customers. The couple looked startled. Evelyn clutching at her scarf, Henry patting down his pockets with trembling hands. They were black. Rick sneered, his voice rising for everyone to hear. "Let me guess, you thought if you sat down, ordered a nice meal, nobody would notice you couldn't pay." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "I don't run a charity here." Ethan's stomach twisted. Evelyn's voice shook. "Sir, we had our money. We must have dropped it somewhere. Please, just let us step outside and retrace our steps. We promise—" Rick cut her off with a snarl. "Yeah, sure, like I haven't heard that one before." His gaze swept the restaurant, looking for support. First, it's "I lost my wallet." Then it's "Oh, please, let me work it off in the kitchen like a movie scene." His lip curled. "You people always have a story. You people." A few guests shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. One man in a suit shook his head and muttered something under his breath. A woman dabbed her mouth with a napkin and glanced away. Ethan's nails dug into the wood of his table. Henry, still searching his pockets, let out a shaky breath. "It must have fallen out when we got out of the taxi, Evelyn." Rick scoffed. "Ooh, a taxi? Wow, so you had money when you got here, huh? But now it's just magically gone? Convenient." Evelyn's voice cracked. "Please, sir, we'll find it. Just give us a moment." Rick leaned down, his shadow swallowing them whole. "You hear that, folks? They just need a moment. Maybe we should all dig into our pockets and see if we can help out, huh?" He turned back to them, dropping his voice low enough that only those closest could hear the venom in it. "You think because you're old, I won't toss you out on your asses." Ethan shot to his feet. His chair scraped against the floor, the sound slicing through the tense silence. Heads turned, the pressure of 100 eyes settled on him, but he didn't care. His heart pounded, his hands clenched at his sides. He didn't think, he just moved, stepping forward until he was between Rick and the couple. "That's enough," Ethan said, voice steady despite the fire burning in his chest. Rick's brow twitched. He straightened, arms crossing over his chest as he looked Ethan up and down. "Oh, great, now we got a little hero." Ethan held his ground. "You don't need to talk to them like that. They didn't mean to lose their money." Rick's laugh was slow, deliberate. What you gonna do, kid? Lecture me on respect? Ethan didn't waver. They're not trying to scam you. Rick's eyes darkened. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Rick's lips curled, something cruel sparking behind his eyes. Oh, I get it now. He took a step forward. You feel bad 'cause they look like you, huh? His voice was low, but everyone could hear. That's it, isn't it? Sticking together. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Rick smirked. Tell me something, kid. You planning to pay for their meal? 'Cause if not, I suggest you sit back down and let the grown folks handle this. Silence stretched between them, heavy, suffocating. Ethan exhaled through his nose, pulled his hand from his pocket, and slapped a crumpled wad of bills onto the counter. The money he had saved for his mother's birthday. The money he had spent months collecting, little by little doing odd jobs, skipping snacks at school, holding back when he wanted something for himself. All of it. Rick stared at the cash. Ethan's voice didn't shake. Now you don't have an excuse. For the first time, Rick hesitated. Then, with an exaggerated sigh, he swiped the money off the counter and stuffed it into the register. Fine, he muttered, but don't come crying when they play you for a fool. Ethan didn't even acknowledge him. He turned to Evelyn and Henry, their eyes wide, their expressions unreadable. Evelyn's hands trembled as she reached for his. You didn't have to do that, dear. Henry swallowed hard. We could have figured something out. Ethan gave them a small, tired smile. Everyone needs help sometimes. Evelyn blinked fast, then quickly pulled out a napkin, scribbling something onto it. Our number, please, if you ever need anything. Ethan took it, nodding. They left quietly. The restaurant hummed back to life, people pretending nothing had happened. But Ethan stood there for a long time, staring at the napkin in his hand, the weight of what he had done settling in his chest. Ethan sat back down, his hands tightening into fists on the table, jaw clenched so hard it hurt. The cash register clicked shut, sealing away the last of his savings, the last of what he had scraped together for his mother's birthday. His stomach twisted, a slow, gnawing ache, not just from hunger, but from the weight of what he had done. He knew it was right, knew that if he had walked away, if he had let it happen, he wouldn't have been able to look at himself in the mirror. But that didn't make it any easier. The restaurant hummed back to life as if nothing had happened. Conversations picked up, forks clinked against plates. The scent of roasted garlic and butter drifted through the air, teasing him with what he had just thrown away. A couple at a nearby table stole a glance at him before quickly looking away. One of the waiters, someone new, hesitated near his table as if wanting to say something, but in the end she just walked past. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling, exhaling slowly. He could still hear Rick's voice echoing in his head. You people, you feel bad 'cause they look like you, huh? His stomach churned. It wasn't the first time he had heard something like that. It wouldn't be the last. He wasn't ready to go home yet. Not ready to sit across from his mom, pretending like everything was fine. Not ready to think about how, tomorrow morning, he'd wake up with nothing to give her but an apology. So he stayed, kept his head down, tried to ignore the way his insides felt hollow. It was maybe 15 minutes later when it happened. He reached for his phone, shifting in his seat, when his elbow knocked his napkin off the table. He sighed, bending down to grab it when something under the booth across from him caught his eye. It was small, tucked into the shadows beneath the seat, black leather, slightly worn at the edges. His brows knit together. He stretched his arm, fingers brushing against cool, smooth material, and pulled it out. A wallet. Ethan flipped it open, and his breath hitched. A photograph. A small, slightly faded one, wedged behind a clear plastic sleeve. A younger Evelyn and Henry, smiling, standing in front of a little house with bright white shutters. His heart thumped hard against his ribs. It was theirs. The realization sent a jolt through him. He shot up, scanning the restaurant, searching for them, but they were gone. His fingers curled around the wallet as he pushed back from the table, moving toward the entrance, half running as he stepped outside. He turned left, then right. The sidewalk was crowded, faces blurring together under the yellow glow of streetlights, but the couple was nowhere in sight. He cursed under his breath, gripping the wallet tighter. He needed to do something. His mind raced through options, and then, before he could second-guess himself, he turned on his heel and walked fast, almost ran down the block toward the police station 2 streets away. The wallet was important, that much he knew, and if there was any chance they could get it back, he had to try. The station was colder than he expected, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead. The officer behind the desk looked up as Ethan approached, his eyes scanning him for a beat too long before finally speaking. "Something you need, kid?" Ethan hesitated, then set the wallet down on the counter. "I found this. It belongs to an elderly couple, Evelyn and Henry. They were just at the restaurant down the street, but I lost them before I could return it." The officer stared at the wallet, then at Ethan, expression unreadable. "You sure you didn't just find it somewhere else?" The words stung. Ethan swallowed, keeping his voice even. "Yeah, I watched them lose it." The officer exhaled, muttered something under his breath, then took the wallet, flipping through the contents. "We'll try to contact them if there's any info inside. What's your name?" "You got a number, in case they want to reach you?" Ethan hesitated for just a second before reciting it. The officer scribbled it down, nodding. "All right, we'll take it from here." That was it. Ethan turned, stepping back into the night air, the cool breeze biting against his skin. He shoved his hands into his pockets and started walking, his insides still twisted into knots. He told himself he did the right thing, that it would get back to them, but there was still this gnawing feeling in his chest, this unfinished weight pressing down on him. By the time he got home, the apartment was dimly lit, the scent of cheap instant noodles filling the air. His mother sat at the kitchen table, a half-empty cup of tea in her hands. She looked up as he walked in, her brows pulling together at the exhaustion in his face. "Baby, what's wrong?" Ethan hesitated in the doorway. For a moment he thought about lying, thought about saying it was nothing, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he let out a breath, walked over to the table, and sat down across from her. And then he told her everything. Isabella listened in silence, her fingers curled around the rim of her tea mug, her eyes fixed on Ethan's face. The dim kitchen light flickered slightly, casting soft shadows along the walls, but all Ethan could see was the quiet tension in his mother's expression. When he finally finished, letting the last of his words settle between them, Isabella exhaled, slow and measured, setting her mug down with a small clink against the worn wooden table. "You gave them all your money?" Her voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, something Ethan couldn't quite place. Ethan shifted, his gaze dropping to the peeling laminate of the tabletop. "Yeah." There was a pause. Then, to his surprise, Isabella smiled, a small, tired thing, but warm. "Baby, you know what the best gift is?" Ethan swallowed, his stomach twisted. "I was supposed to buy you something nice." "You did," she said softly, reaching out, resting her hand over his. "You helped someone who needed it. That's worth more than anything you could have wrapped in a box." Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that what he had done was enough, but as he lay in bed that night, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, the weight of reality pressed down on him. No matter how right it had felt in the moment, the truth remained. His mother's birthday had come, and he had nothing to give her but an empty wallet and an apology. Morning came too soon. The sun barely peeked through the thin curtains, casting faint, pale light across the small kitchen where Isabella stood by the stove, stirring a pot of oatmeal. Ethan sat at the table, pushing a spoon through his own bowl, watching the way the oatmeal clung to the edges. It was thinner than usual, stretched with extra water to make it last longer. He knew without asking that this was all they had left. His mother sat down across from him, offering a small, tired smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She took a slow sip of coffee, black, no sugar, no milk. Ethan kept his head down, the silence between them stretching, heavy with things neither of them wanted to say. Then came the knock. Sharp, firm, unexpected. Ethan's head snapped up, his spoon clattering against the side of his bowl. Isabella frowned, pushing her chair back as she stood. It was early, too early for visitors. A cold sliver of unease slid down his spine as she moved toward the door, fingers hovering near the lock. "Who is it?" A pause, then a familiar voice muffled through the wood. "Evelyn and Henry, dear." Ethan shot to his feet. Isabella hesitated before unlocking the door. As it swung open, the older couple stood framed in the dim glow of the apartment hallway, their faces illuminated by the flickering light above them. Evelyn's eyes softened the moment she saw Ethan. "Oh, sweetheart, I had a feeling we'd find you here." Ethan blinked. "How did you—" "The police called," Henry said, stepping inside, his gaze flicking over the modest apartment, the fraying edges of the couch, the stack of overdue bills peeking from the counter. "They said a young man turned in our wallet. We knew it had to be you." Isabella looked between them, then back at Ethan, her brows knitting together in confusion. "What's going on?" Henry glanced at Evelyn, who nodded slightly before turning to Isabella with a kind smile. "Your son is a remarkable young man." A beat of silence. Then Henry pulled something from his coat pocket, a small, folded stack of bills. He stepped forward, holding it out. Ethan's stomach twisted. "No," he said quickly, shaking his head. "I didn't do it for money." Evelyn chuckled. "Oh, we know that, dear. That's exactly why we're here." Henry's expression grew more serious. "We didn't just come to return the money you gave us. We came because we saw something tonight, and we need to ask you something important." Ethan frowned. "Ask me what?" Evelyn looked at Isabella, then back at Ethan, her eyes gentle but firm. "How would you feel about a fresh start?" Ethan's breath caught in his chest. A fresh start? The words felt too big, too impossible to mean anything real. He looked between Evelyn and Henry, searching their faces for some kind of explanation, some hint that this was all some strange misunderstanding. But there was only certainty in their eyes, unshaken, unwavering. Isabella stood frozen beside him, her fingers gripping the fabric of her sweater, confusion tightening the corners of her mouth. I don't understand," she said slowly, her voice careful as if afraid to hope. "What are you saying?" Henry exhaled, tucking his hands into the pockets of his coat, his gaze sweeping across the cramped living room, the fraying edges of the couch, the water stains spreading like shadows across the ceiling. A single flickering lamp cast long, uneven shadows along the peeling wallpaper. On the counter, an envelope sat half open, a bright red final notice stamped across its surface. The old radiator by the window rattled weakly, barely keeping the chill out. The air was thick, not just with the scent of instant noodles and weak tea, but with something heavier, the kind of exhaustion that settled into a place over years of struggle. When Henry spoke, his voice was steady, deliberate. "We know what you're going through." His eyes flickered to Ethan. "We know what you've sacrificed, not just tonight, but for a long time." Ethan stiffened. "How?" Evelyn smiled gently. "Because we asked." Henry nodded. "After we left the restaurant, we made a few calls. We asked around. Your friend Lucas was more than happy to tell us about you." He tilted his head slightly, considering Ethan. "He told us about how you've been working small jobs after school, how you've been saving every penny to help your mother, how you go without so she can have a little more, how you never ask for anything, even when you need it." His voice softened. "How you were willing to give up the only money you had to help two strangers." Ethan's stomach twisted. He shifted on his feet, suddenly self-conscious, as if the walls around him had been stripped away, leaving him bare. He wasn't used to people knowing things about him, people noticing. Isabella's voice was quiet. "Why would you do all this?" Evelyn stepped forward, her presence warm, grounding. "Because, my dear, we aren't just an old couple who lost their wallet tonight." She glanced at Henry, then back at them, her lips curling into something soft but knowing. "We are, in fact, quite wealthy." Ethan blinked. His brain stalled. "Wealthy?" "Millionaires," Henry said simply, as if it was the most casual thing in the world. Silence hung heavy in the room. Isabella sucked in a sharp breath, her fingers curling into the fabric of her sweater. Ethan barely moved, barely breathed as the weight of their words settled over him like thick, invisible hands pressing down on his shoulders. He searched their faces again, looking for any sign that this was some kind of cruel joke, but there was nothing but quiet certainty. Henry sighed, running a hand over his chin. "We don't usually tell people that up front. It complicates things. People act differently when they know, but tonight—" He met Ethan's gaze, his eyes glinting with something fierce, something certain. "Tonight we met a boy who didn't hesitate to do the right thing, even when it cost him everything. A boy who expected nothing in return. And that, Ethan, is rare." Ethan's heart pounded in his ears. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't know what to say. He had spent his whole life watching people with money move through the world like it owed them something. He had never imagined standing in front of people like Evelyn and Henry and hearing them talk about him like he was the rare one. Isabella swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "What exactly are you offering?" Evelyn's gaze softened. "A new beginning." Henry nodded. "We want to help. A proper home, a stable future, a chance for Ethan to go to a better school, to have the opportunities he deserves. And for you, Isabella, we can make sure you have work that pays you what you're worth. No more struggling, no more worrying about how you'll keep the lights on." Ethan felt his breath hitch. The weight pressing down on his shoulders felt unbearable. He thought about the past few months, how he had watched his mother lose sleep over job applications that never got a response, how he had sat in the dark when they couldn't afford the electric bill, how he had counted quarters just to make sure they had enough for groceries. He thought about how 2 weeks ago his mother had finally sat him down, her eyes red-rimmed and tired, and told him that if things didn't change, he might have to leave school. Now, standing here, hearing these words, it didn't feel real. "Why would you—" His voice cracked, raw with something he wasn't sure he knew how to name. "Why would you do this for us?" Henry didn't hesitate. "Because we can." Evelyn smiled, gentle but firm. "Because we should." Ethan's chest ached. He could feel Isabella's gaze on him, could hear the way her breath was uneven, could feel the tremble in the air between them. He wanted to say something, to ask if this was real, if this wasn't just some elaborate dream he was going to wake up from. But when he looked up, Evelyn and Henry were still there, waiting, offering him something he had never dared to believe could be his. Hope. Ethan's throat tightened. The weight of their offer, the sheer impossibility of it, pressed down on him like something too vast, too unreal to grasp. His mother sat rigid beside him, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. The hum of the old refrigerator buzzed softly behind them, a constant reminder of everything they didn't have, of everything they had learned to live without. The bills on the counter, the dim lighting, the cold seeping through the thin walls. It had always been there, an unspoken truth neither of them had the energy to acknowledge. And now, two strangers, two people who had every reason to walk away, were standing in their cramped apartment, offering to change everything. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears, his fingers curled into fists, his nails digging into his palms as he stared at them, searching their faces, trying to find the catch, the condition, the reason. "You don't even know us," he said finally, his voice hoarse. Henry exhaled, slow and measured, as if he had been expecting this. "We know enough." His eyes flickered to Isabella, then back to Ethan, unwavering. "We know that you've been surviving, not living, that you've been carrying more than any 14-year-old should have to, that you gave away everything you had without a second thought, expecting nothing in return." He tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "That tells us everything we need to know." Evelyn stepped forward, her presence warm, grounding. "We don't do this often, Ethan," she said gently. "But when we see something, someone, worth believing in, we don't ignore it." Isabella let out a shaky breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "But this is too much." Henry's lips quirked into something almost sad. "Is it?" He glanced around the apartment, at the peeling paint, the second-hand furniture, the exhaustion etched into Isabella's face. "Or is it just enough?" Silence stretched between them. Ethan's chest ached. He thought about the past few years, about the way his mother had stopped eating full meals so he could have more, the way she had worked late shifts, exhausted and running on fumes just to keep them afloat. He thought about the way his stomach had twisted when she told him he might have to leave school, about the way he had forced himself to smile and say, "It's okay, Mom. I'll help. We'll figure it out." Because what else was he supposed to say? His jaw clenched. He wasn't used to things getting better. He wasn't used to people caring. He wasn't used to kindness without a price. He swallowed hard. "And what if we say no?" Evelyn smiled, a quiet, knowing thing. "Then we shake hands, we say goodnight, and we leave. No strings, no expectation." Ethan's throat burned. He turned to his mother, searching her face, looking for something, anything, that would tell him what to do. Isabella's eyes were wet, her breath unsteady. She reached out, cupped Ethan's face in her hands, brushing her thumb over his cheek, like she used to when he was little. "Baby," she whispered, voice trembling, "you don't have to carry this alone anymore." Ethan squeezed his eyes shut. He let out a breath, long and shuddering, then opened them again, meeting Evelyn and Henry's gaze with something raw and unguarded in his own. "Okay." His voice cracked. He cleared his throat, steadied himself. "Okay." Evelyn's smile softened. Henry nodded, his eyes glinting with something like pride. "Then let's get started." Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your